Now, I kind of have two ways that I want to approach this. I feel like I have too many things in front of me, and it's going to be a little bit stressful. But I have a pile of tarot decks and I have a pile of oracle decks, but I have two sets of decks that work together in such a powerful way that I feel like I want to talk about them together. So I do apologize, because I know some people will be just focused or interested on just tarot or just oracle, and these are definitely a blend of both, but I'm just going to go there. So I have a video on shamanistic or animistic style decks. So I have a video about that shows all my decks and the ones that I really love. And I talk more in depth about these kind of core decks for me, along with the Brian Froud. Both the fairy oracles are always out on my Into the Wild Woods space, altar space. And I use these in two readings that are very much, readings I do for myself, but also important readings that I do for clients, an ancestor reading and a web reading. And these are decks, along with some pulling in some of the other ones that I'll talk about. But these have become really core decks for my personal practice. Again, they're always out on my sacred space, as well as for readings that really kind of tap into that my personal practice. One is the Shaman's Oracle. This is trimmed down because this is not great cardstock. I have a walkthrough on this. Not great cardstock, but amazing deck. For me, it's less about the artwork, which is cool. It's cave paintings. It's far more about the suits. And it's in the guidebook, there is a message from the cards, and to me, instead of the image, that message from the card functions as the image for me, and it holds the oracle. And so I just love this. I use it a lot. It is certainly one of my most used decks of 2019. Just because of the readings that I do use it with. And so yeah, that's definitely one of them. The other one that functions somewhat similar in that is sort of the core deck for my ancestor reading. The Weaver's Oracle is a core deck for my web reading. And for me, again, this is a bibliomancy deck. The cards are amazing. The way that she produced the art and the size of the art is incredible. But each one of these weavers, Udagans, shamans, each one is, I love this one, has a story. And for me, the oracle is in that story. And so the cards are amazing, but the cards really serve to take me to that story. And I will read that story out loud because it is where the oracle is for me. Again, everybody's got their own experience with this deck. I only ever pull one. It's very strong energy. It's very, yes, grandmother, but grandmother that's going to throw you off a cliff. She literally, there's one that's that you climb all the way up to the top of the cliff and she's going to shove you back down so that you learn how to fall. It's not easy energy whatsoever. And yes, it is all females, but it is very much masculine and feminine energy within the female people that are in here, or shamans here. So very much a huge core part of my practice. The other is the Illuminated Earth Oracle cards. And this, for me, beautifully represents the larger energy patterns of the earth. It very much represents energy and the way that it moves within the natural world that isn't good or bad. It's not that something is evil and that's why it's destructive. It is simply a force of nature. It is the greater swath of energy, and we have to learn how to work with it, around it, and things of that nature, because it is nature. The other deck that comes close to this, it's similar, would be the Devas of Creation. But for 2019, it has no question been the Illuminated Earth Oracle. I absolutely love it. I think I've used it in so many different readings. I read it in conjunction with the, some of these are whopper jawed, with the Shaman's Oracle for ancestor readings. I use it along the side in the tree for my web readings. For, again, these are things I do for myself as well as for clients. So I have done a ton of readings with this deck, and I absolutely love it. It reads really beautiful with the Moonchild Tarot. Moonchild Tarot would probably be, I don't have that pulled out, but it would definitely be an honorable mention for grief work. I think I've used the Moonchild Tarot almost exclusively in 2019 for grief readings, and it has just been an amazing deck for that. And it also goes really beautifully with the Illuminated Earth. So very much a well-used deck in 2019. I think you can even see it on the edges. I edged these, but my edgings usually hold up really well. And there's no question at how much riffle shuffling this deck has taken over the course of the year. And then lastly in this set, although there's other decks that I will pull into this, like the Angels and Ancestors, like the, oh, I didn't re-pull that out. I had to re-pull everything out. Like the Mystical Shaman's Oracle is very, would be used with these decks. No question, I've used that a lot with these decks. But the tarot that I finally found a tarot that kind of works with all of those decks that I'm using a lot, and it's the Crow Tarot. And it's amazing. It is very Rider-Waite-Smith, and so I didn't think that, I knew I was going to like it, but I didn't know that I would love it, and I do love it. Despite the very strong Rider-Waite-Smith symbolism, it's something about, just because the crows are there, I think, and there's no people, that it reads very Pip-like, even though it's very clearly Rider-Waite-Smith. I think it is fantastic. This is the US Games version, and color palette, it goes with all the decks that I use, but also just, again, having the ravens there really works for me, or the crows, sorry. Having them there works, and it's just a beautiful deck. A surprise favorite for me for sure. So that's the Crow Tarot, and this is the US Games version. I love the back. I still need to do the sides. I haven't done that yet. So these decks that I just talked about work beautifully as a set of my own personal practice, as well as readings that I do that are kind of in the vein of that. Again, sometimes pulling in Mystical Shaman. Mostly that's the other one that gets pulled in here, is the Mystical Shaman. And I will use this a lot in conjunction with these cards. So that happens a lot. Sometimes the Angels and Ancestors, but mostly probably the Mystical Shaman gets into this category. So I'm going to put those over here. The other pile of decks that have really kind of formed a cohesive unit have been for my past life readings. So this is a reading that I use a lot of different decks for it, and it just has formed a sort of unit of decks, and I do them a lot, again, for myself and for others, and so I've gotten a lot of use out of them. The Darkness of Light Tarot is one of my favorite tarots in general, but I almost always, and almost exclusively, I do use this for other things, but I almost exclusively use this for past life readings. So it forms the core core reading of my past life reading, even though, again, as you just saw with that, it is a Rider-Waite-Smith, but there is enough openness here, even for me, in those ones that I read a little bit differently. So yes, Darkness of Light Tarot, it does an amazing job at bringing out the highlights and the lights, but then also really showing the shadows as well. It's just a beautiful, beautiful deck. One of my top favorites, but then I also use it a lot. Along with that would be the Arcana Tarot playing cards. This is because of the size, this is a poker size, and you'll see the backs are stunning. It is, oh my goodness, as I throw cards. It is a full tarot deck, but it does have playing card pips. And it has the tarot pips, so like the spades are associated with the swords, and the little swords are in the corner. But it's very much a pip deck, but the small size lets it expand. The fifth card of Marie White's past life reading is a piece of advice from your past self to you now, and that's the core of what I want to come out. And so I like to expand that by pulling 3 more cards, and because of the small size, it just works really well, and I use this constantly that way. Every once in a while I will also use the Chamonix Tarot in that capacity, but 99% of the time I'm using the Arcana Tarot playing cards with the Darkness of Light. The other thing for 2019, which is the Art History Past Lives Tarot deck, I now use this all the time. I used to use, well, that's going to be more for this other one that's coming into play, but I don't really use this as a tarot deck. I have, again, walkthroughs of these. I don't really use it as a tarot deck. There are keywords on the corner, and so I use it more as an oracle deck, and I just pull a card for time and place, and then 1 card for what's being brought forward from the past life, and then I'm really using the keyword and the art more than I am using the tarot cards in it. I just don't really use it that way. She also has a past life workbook that is on my list for 2020 to get and to work through. But that has become a key part of my past life readings. Also, I used to use Carolyn Miss's archetype cards, and I do like the archetype cards. Visually, they don't really mesh with the rest of my reading, and but I kept using them because they were the closest of what I was looking for. I recently put up a walkthrough. Sorry, I'm having a hard time getting it out of its case, which I don't normally do, so I feel like I've grabbed it wrong or something. And this is the Divine Muses. And this is really based off of archetypes, and it has worked really well. This is kind of at the tail end of 2019 that I started using this, and sometimes I'll use another deck, but this has that sense of settling into place with those cards that I just mentioned as sort of this unit that functions really well for me in that capacity of past lives or just kind of diving deep energies. So so this is the Divine Muses. So that's another set. So I just kind of wanted to mention those as sets because I do find, because many of my readings that I do are based around specific decks often, unless it's a general tarot reading, then I'm going to pull any tarot deck that I'm using at the time, or it feels like it's the right deck to use. Or like a Grand Tableau or something that's just a Lenormand deck. But a lot of my readings are built up or based around specific decks, and these two piles have just kind of formed an alliance with each other, and they work really well together. And I thought that was interesting, and I just thought I would mention it. So, whew, I know this is going to be a long one. Buckle up, right? That's why I'm going to try to put this timestamps in. Okay, moving into types of decks. I'm going to I don't know why I even say the word quickly. I know every time I say it, you guys all probably roll your eyes. I'm going to start with sort of other, like I guess miscellaneous types of decks. 2 decks have been a real surprise for me. Oh, I've had a couple surprises, but this one for sure. So I do read runes. I've read runes since the early 90s. So, runes are a big deal for me, but I'm a caster with runes. I have one other rune deck, I believe. One is like a teaching one that like has the keywords on the back, and one is by the artist of the Heindel Tarot, but that's more like a collectible because it's out of print, and I keep that, but I don't use rune decks. And then this Cosmic Whisper rune deck came out, And my friend Patrick, he had seen it, was really excited about it. And I was like, you know, it's really pretty, but I'm a caster. I don't use rune decks. I just wouldn't have the use for it because it's not cheap. I don't know how much it costs, to be honest, because I didn't purchase it. It was a birthday gift from Patrick. But I know it's not cheap, and it's because of a reason. Like, it is handmade, and it is layers upon layers of cardstock to create this. They feel like wood chips. I did a walkthrough of this as well as 2 other decks that I ended up erasing off of the stick. And it's, you know, I do long walkthroughs, and so once I've done it once and I'm now having to do it again, I kind of drag my feet at it, but I need to redo those. Anyways, I have found so much joy in this deck. Again, I still would consider myself a rune caster, but for pulling a card and setting that energy out, which I've done all along in the past, but I would stick a little rune. So you can imagine, let me grab, excuse me. You know, if you're setting a rune out and it's just like little tiny, you know, inch to 2 inches rune, like up on your altar space, it doesn't really stand out to sit there with that energy and see it and kind of remind yourself. So I feel like this does a really good job for that. I also use a rune of the year, and so having that set up with this is really beautiful. Just pulling 3 runes, like sometimes I'm not casting, I'm just going to pull out 3 runes or something like that. And so I have found a space for a rune deck in my life, even though I do believe as a system it shines in casting, because there is something about casting that is very different than laying cards nicely in a row. When you cast, whether it's charms or runes or oghams or my journey tokens, which I'll talk about, whatever that is that you are casting has an opportunity to interact with each other, to clump up or spread apart. And so you not only say, okay, well, this is this particular symbol, but we're seeing how are the symbols interacting with each other. That is, I think you can't get the same experience from laying things in a row. And so I still believe in the power of casting with runes. However, I have found a space for a rune deck, and I absolutely love this, and I didn't necessarily think I would. So I had to put that one in there. So that's the Cosmic Whispers. I don't know if this is still available. I know there was a limited number made because of the way in which they were made, so I have no clue. But there are other rune decks out there, so there's one on Etsy with, I think, crystals and plants in it that looks really beautiful. Along the line of castings in 2019, I have to make a quick mention of my own journey tokens. This is, you know, I have videos out about it. I'm not going to belabor the point. They are wood tokens with symbols on them, you know, that you recognize. Directions, moon phases, seasons, a way that energy can get blocked, repelled, bounced around, like disrupted in some way. Energy points, things like that. So everything, you know, again, when you make your own system or you make your own deck or something like that, of course, it's perfect for you because it has everything in it that's important for me to tap into energetically, and casting them allows them to interact in ways that I love to see. So having this come into fruition has been an absolute joy in 2019. I'm now more than halfway through painting them all to make a deck version of it, but the casting version will always have, to me, again, almost like what I just said with runes, it kind of, the way that they interact, you can't get without casting. And so those are two standouts for 2019 for sure. Lenormand decks, of course, I love my Lenormand deck. But I will say in 2019, I haven't been able to use it as much because my table needs a mini deck, or else I have to take everything off of it to do a grand tableau. So I've used my deck a lot in the course of doing 9 cards, doing 3 voices reading. I found a couple decks that people have asked me, like, what decks do I use This year has definitely been the Light Seers Tarot and the Way Home Tarot have been my favorite decks to use with my own deck. But again, as I said with the Journey Tokens, I would be not being truthful if I didn't say this was one of my favorite decks. I painted it for myself. It expresses the energies of each of the cards exactly the way that I see them. So of course it is a favorite. And then at the end of the year, I was able to get it in mini form, which means I could start using it again and be still my heart. So definitely a favorite of mine, will always be my own deck. And I've come to terms with that. Like, it always unsettled me, like, oh, well, that's kind of weird. It's like, no, it's not weird. I painted it for myself. Of course it's a favorite of mine. But the other one would be the 1889. Other than the two most used Lenormand decks in my collection are my own deck for me and the 1889. This was the game of the, it was called the game, no, yeah, I think it was called the Game of Hope, maybe originally, and then it was remade into the 1889. The first version of it was I think the second Lenormand deck that I ever purchased, and so I did tons of reading with it. And while this year, there's no question that most of my grand tableaus were done with the 1889 Lenormand. I do have some honorable mentions. I have actually really enjoyed the Earl Lenormand, which is big cards for 9 cards. I've enjoyed that. I really do love the Whisper Lenormand, and definitely the Monster Lenormand that I don't think you can get anymore. Was a treat for me in 1889 and 2019, but there's no question that most of my readings with Lenormand were either mine or the 1889 Lenormand. But I do have to show this monster one by Jess Roller. I probably said her name wrong. I just think it's the cutest Lenormand deck on the planet Earth. It literally makes my heart so happy. I adore it. Yeah, absolutely love it. So that's, but I didn't use this a lot because I do a lot of grand tableaus, and again, I have to have mini sizes to do a grand tableau in my space. So I haven't got a ton of use out of it, but I love it. Also the green glyph, which I haven't, that was later in the year. That is a stunning deck that I've loved. But in terms of most used, there you go. Playing card decks, because I do read playing card decks. No question, hands down, 2 decks. One is called the Fauna playing card deck. This is the failed edition. This was a Kickstarter that I backed, and I got both versions. The one version has a different color for each of the suits, which I love. But for playing card divination, I do like to see the black and the red, or having 2 colors. This is actually like a navy blue and a red, because it does help with yes and no questions, to not have to kind of think through the 4 colors, just for quick read. This is the most stunning. The pips are, you know, clovers, little fall leaves. Let me try to find, I mean, look at the court cards are stunning animals. The aces are just gorgeous, and the backs are amazing. So no question, this hasn't left my table. This probably won't leave my table. I have a lot of playing cards that I absolutely love. I got a lot in 2019 that I love, but in terms of standout, this one, as well as this is not for sale. I hope that he puts it up for sale at some point, but this is the Synth playing cards, and this is by the Ocean. He's created a tarot deck called the Ocean Dry Tarot, and so he had a different name on social media, but his name that he uses is the Ocean Dry Tarot, like on Instagram, and he also has a YouTube channel. He made this up, and he was posting all the images, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's like my perfect playing card deck. The quartz are stunning. They're gorgeous. Absolutely. His use of color throughout, this deck and definitely the Ocean Dry Tarot is phenomenal, and it really speaks to my soul. I hope that he puts this. I'm going to try to find the Queen of Spades, which is the Queen of Swords. This is my favorite ever Queen of Spades playing card. So no question whatsoever that Collins, or aka Ocean Dry Tarot, like on Instagram and things like that, is just a huge standout for 2019. And then lastly, in the kind of other category is astrology decks. Of course, one of my best friends of all times made the living real astrology cards. So am I biased? Yes, because I was with him every step of the way, seeing it become made, getting to input, saying what I must have. I don't use, I want to preface this by saying I don't use astrology cards as oracle decks. So I don't use this deck to draw oracle readings. Some people do. These are the houses. I don't. I use it to actually lay out as above, so below. So this moon is in this place, in this house. I'm laying out that energy and then doing a reading underneath it. Or if I'm doing a past life reading, I might be pulling some of the astrological things out there. I begged for the north and south nodes because, again, really use those for past life readings. Sun is gorgeous. It has the moon phases in it. So, of course, this is like talking about my own deck, because it really has it's everything I wanted in an astrology deck, which is not having keywords on it so that you can do things the way you do it. Just having clean representations and the symbols. It has the seasons. I love the way the houses are done, because everybody looks at houses maybe slightly different. But then the seasons are absolutely stunning. They're the 8 seasons of the wheel, which is how I do the seasons. So, I mean, again, this is like me babbling about my own deck. It is the astrology deck that I wanted. So I love this. There's no question. This and his birth, or his wheel chart, which is very different this year. Actually, this year's version is he sent me on a board, and that's amazing, but it fell behind my desk, which I have to pull out to get it out. But I used this was an old version of it. The other one's up on my thing. The new version has all of the different important astrological events, but this is my calendar for the moon cycles and the seasons and the spokes of the wheel, which I work really directly with. So these two things are things that I use on a regular basis as a tool. Again, I don't use this for oracle readings. I use it to represent the sky. So that's the experience that I have with it. So that is the other category of like miscellaneous others that kind of stand out for 2019. Okay, some of you still might be with me. I don't know. All right, so let me go through the rest of the Oracle and Tarot decks. Again, I talked about some in those groupings, but some of those were Tarot and some of those were Oracle. These are in no particular order. These are just standout favorites for 2019. No question, John Bauer Tarot. Love this deck. Used it a lot for myself. I have, I think, like 6 videos doing it also on making YouTube videos, but using like fables, so random bibliomancy, picking a random fable and then pulling 3 cards and telling a story reading. For myself, this was hugely, I did many of these for myself. Also did them on again, some on this channel. And this deck is not what I would consider a traditional tarot. You have to be willing to take a walk into the woods, but for storytelling purposes, it's absolutely amazing. The other one that's like this in terms of that storytelling ability, which I didn't pull out because I've used it in a class that I taught, but I haven't used it a ton yet, is the Enchanted. I have it set to use more this coming year. The Forest of Enchantment Tarot. I used that in a storytelling class, and it worked really, as did several other people, and it worked really beautifully also for that sort of storytelling modality. But in terms of absolute knockouts for 2019, I have to say the John Bauer. It is one of my all-time favorite decks, as well as being a standout for 2019. Children of Litha. You've all heard me wax poetic about this deck. I have used this a ton this year. What do I love about it? I love the vibrant colors. I love that it represents all of the parts of nature as I see that, in terms of animal life or biological, no, because that's plants too. Anyways, in the major arcana, it is all Fey energy. It's kind of animal shapeshiftery Fey energy. In the pips, the 1 through 10s of the minors is all animals, and then the court cards are all people, human beings from different cultures. And so it has the human element, it has the animal element, it has the Fey element. There are, like, plants and things don't stand out super strong. Of course, they are just in there because it's part of the natural world. But there isn't, like, all of the courts are plants or something like that. But in terms of creatures, we have human creatures, animal creatures, and Fey creatures, and so I love that. Now there are a couple non-favorites in here, like the Emperor isn't my favorite, and the probably the Ten of Swords. But one of the things I love is that she is, at some point, her goal is to make 4 decks to represent each of the seasons, of the main seasons, that you can swap cards in and out of. So I hold out hope that someday I'll be able to swap a couple out for ones that I like even more. But I love this deck. I love the quality. I love the coloration. It's just a gorgeous deck, and I used it quite a lot in 2019 for client readings and for myself. Way Home Tarot is definitely one of those surprise decks. I was not going to purchase it, not because I didn't think the art was beautiful, but because I thought it was a little bit too mixed up. So you have the silhouettes in the courts, which I love. Then you have sort of sketchy art with a lot of open space like this or like this. And then you have full card art like this with a border around it. And I just felt like sometimes you can get decks that are beautiful concepts, but they don't end up meshing together and they just feel disjointed. I love this card. And I really thought that that's what was going to happen with this deck. I was wrong. For me, I was wrong. For other people, that may be the case. I love this deck. I love the open whiteness of a lot of the cards. Coloration wise, I've used this a lot with my Lenormand deck. I love some of the unique interpretations. I think the only one I really am like not fond of is the 8 of Cups with the octopus and like all the garbage on the ocean floor. But you know, there's always cards that are not your favorite. But I love this deck. I have used this so much, and I do not see myself stopping using it. Like I can see myself continuing to use this a lot. It's a great reader for clients. The backing is gorgeous. This was definitely a surprise. You know, my friend Patrick, he bought it for himself, and so I was able to see all the cards. I'm like, okay, maybe, and he see some of the cards pulled as a reading. So I'm like, okay, you know what, maybe that's actually going to be a deck that I would like. So I took a chance on it and I bought it, and I'm so glad I did because I love it. The Herb Crafter's Tarot. This to me is one of the smart decks of 2019. I have tried a lot of plant decks. I work with herbs and essential oils, herbs and things in my personal practice and in health practices. And I've tried a lot of botanical oracles and a couple tarots, and I just, none of them, some of them are absolutely wonderful in their own way. This deck, I feel like, is the one that just kind of ticked all the boxes. Now, there are 78 cards. There are thousands of plants, right? So, and we all have our favorites, those ones that we use. So is this going to be perfect? Of course not. Or there's always going to be a card where you're like, oh, but it should have been this card. But I feel like the way that they did the suits, the way that they did the number progressions, the minors, I think were so smartly done. The way that I just think that it was such, or is such a intentional and mindfully created deck. My only quibble is that I wish that the courts were not all women, but because you don't see their bodies, you only see their hands, it doesn't stand out to me as being, you know, as problematic. But the art is stunning. The mindful intention of setting the system up to work within the plant system is brilliant, and I just think it's an amazingly done deck and should receive a lot of kudos for that. I've used it a lot in kind of walking. I have a wild, I can't remember what I called it, but I had for I don't know if it was from, well, there was a reason why I did the reading and I can't remember. But anyway, I pulled, like, you literally are taking a walk in the woods and you stumble upon a plant, you stumble upon this. There's like all different decks. And so I use this a lot in pulling for the plant. But I just I love this deck. I think it's just really well done. So yeah, definitely kudos for 2019. I have to say the Dark Mansion Tarot. I love this deck. It makes me smile. For Embrace for October, every year I do Embrace the Magical, and I have an Embrace the Magical reading that I do just in October. And so all month of October, I use this deck. I love this deck. There is a quirkiness to it, yes, no question. But it also reads beautifully. The quirkiness does not detract from its reading. It is just part of, it works and it functions beautifully. It doesn't make readings to be more simplistic. It doesn't give them a humorous quality to the readings, although it can. But it can. I've had beautiful, deep, and poignant readings with it, and I just think it's fantastic. There's a new deck coming out. My most anticipated deck for 2020 is the Dark, I think it's called the Dark Woods Tarot. Yeah, I think it's the Dark Woods Tarot. It's out for pre-order, I think, on Amazon. I don't think it's due out till like June. And to me, that's like an adult, more an adult version of this. But I'm much anticipating it being, and then the backs, this is one of my all-time favorite backs for tarot. I think it's gorgeous. So I've just really enjoyed this. I may pick up the normal size version in 2020. But I have to say I have enjoyed the large version of this a lot. So that's definitely just one that makes me smile for 2019. And it reads beautifully. Okay, two more tarot decks. Most anticipated deck of 2019 was the Majestic Earth. It was a Kickstarter in 2018. It was due out in spring of 2019. I think it was a little delayed. I didn't find it to be excessively delayed. I think some people maybe were frustrated with it, but I felt like it was not that far off the timing that was set. I don't know. It didn't bother me because I knew I was going to love it. This is by J.D. Hildegard Hinkle, who curated the Tarot of Delphi, which is one of my favorite decks of all times. And so I knew I was going to love this, and it did not disappoint. I know some people, I think, had some disappointment after the long wait. I'm not one of those people. The backings are one of my favorite backs. The cardstock shuffles like a dream if you're a riffle shuffler. I just love everything about this deck. There are keywords at the bottom, which I don't generally like, but they are broad enough. You can see the original intention, but they are definitely broad enough to not lock you in, and they're unobtrusive. I do like the astrological signs being there, even if you're not always going to agree on what astrological signs. Again, they're there, but they're not obtrusive. And I love this deck so much. I've used it. This is one I don't love. There's always a couple cards, right? The Chariot, definitely not a favorite. But I've used this for Wheel of the Year readings because it's the Earth, right? It's the Wheel of the Year. It's in the majestic Earth. I've used it for my year ahead reading. I've used it for I've used it for regular readings. Like, I've used it for clients and myself, and I love how it reads. I just absolutely love it. She is, I think, amazing at curating art that doesn't just, oh, that's pretty and it kind of looks like this. There is depth to her, the way that she chooses artwork that I think doesn't always happen with pre-existing art. Sometimes pre-existing art decks don't work. This, I think she does an amazing job at it, and I bought a second copy. It's now available on Amazon. I think her leftovers are up on Amazon, and I bought a second copy because this is my, again, I did my year ahead reading with it, and I like to leave those hanging up, but I use it all the time. So I've got one that I can just leave the cards hanging up on, and then one that I'm using for, it sits on my table, it hasn't left my table, just for doing regular readings. So absolutely not disappointing for me. Definitely a top favorite of 2019. And lastly, on tarot decks is a Light Seers Tarot. This is the Kickstarter version, and it has the original 10 of, there was a lot of controversy around this deck regarding the 10 of Swords. One of the reasons I loved the deck was for the 10 of Swords. I think it's gorgeous. It's for me personally, it is the Queen of Swords in making. She's about to stand up and become the Queen of Swords. That's me. I loved it. But I have to say this was also a bit of a surprise deck because I bought it because I think Chris-Anne is really a fantastic person. She's an amazing artist. I love the color saturation. I use this with my Lenormand deck, but I thought I wouldn't like it as much as I did because I'm not a big fan of modern decks. Again, think there's gorgeous modern decks out there, but for me personally, I don't use a lot of decks that have motorcycles like the Knight of Swords. It also felt very young in terms of, young, beautiful people. Just modern. It had a very modern feel to it, and I just don't tend to lean towards those types of decks. But I use this for client readings all the time. I've done a ton of year ahead readings with it. I've done just whatever. I've done a lot of readings with it. And for client readings, I have found this to be a really fantastic deck. It has surprised me how much I have used it and loved it. I do have the mass market version that I actually bought for I was going to give it either to my daughter or a friend of mine who's just getting into tarot, and I thought she would love it. My version is miscut, not tremendously so, but like one half of the deck was cut slightly smaller than the other half of the deck. So it's not a horrible thing, but I do need to contact Hay House about it. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but it's just miscut. That's the only problem. People had a variety of problems. I think they did an amazing job in terms of the color saturation. I don't love the cardstock. Hay House has stunning, stunning cardstock, stunning beautiful matte cardstock. So I don't know why they chose to put it on this. It's not horrible. It riffle shuffles fine, but it just knowing what Hay House has, I don't know why this deck wouldn't have been put on that cardstock. There are some changes, like the Hierophant instead of, which I actually prefer. This is the new Ten of Swords. I prefer the original, although I think this is beautiful. It just doesn't have the weight of the original Ten of Swords with the, for me, again, it is the Queen of Swords in making, and that's the Queen of Swords is my card. It's a powerful card to me, and so when I see that Ten of Swords, I remember the first time seeing it and thinking, she is about to rise up. I mean, it literally gives me goosebumps when I think of it, because I'm like, she's going to rise up and become the Queen of Swords, and it just blew me, that card blew me away. Everybody has their own experiences and can choose to work with or buy what works for them. But yeah, so this one has a different Ten of Swords in it. So I need to get that sorted out with Hay House, but I think this is actually probably a really fantastic beginning deck for a lot of people. So that's the Light Sea Tarot. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I think we only have 4 more decks to go. I've already talked about quite a few Oracle decks in those sets of cards that I talked about already. I definitely would have to bring in the Mystical Shaman Oracle. It is gorgeous. The color palette, you can see it's when it's like that, that means it's part of my Animistic Earthy set. I'm not a huge fan of the guidebook. I don't really use the guidebook. The images, the color, and the titles at the bottom, for me, because I guess I work with a lot of these style of decks, is more than enough to for me to use this deck without really using the guidebook. But the cards themselves, the color palette, the imagery is absolutely stunning, and I have done so many readings with this. I definitely have to say I do love to use this with Colette Baron-Reid's Spirit Animal, even though it's not my absolute favorite animal deck of 2019. It definitely deserves an honorable mention, and these two decks together are absolutely amazing. So yes, definitely Mystical Shaman Oracle cards for 2019. Sacred Destiny has been in the last 3 months maybe. Again, this is one of the readings that I did the full reading on, broke everything down into piles, and then deleted the whole chip, and I have to redo it. It's just hard. But anyways, this is by Denise Linn. I have used this deck so much. I kind of bought it on a whim at the bookstore because of the vibrant art. We see a theme here. I love vibrant colors. It has a typical keyword at the bottom. The power of this deck is, though, that each of these cards represent a landscape, and I haven't trimmed it. I do want to pick up a second copy and trim it because I think it would be gorgeous trimmed. But I also do like the framing of sort of stepping into this landscape. I've used this for, I think, every single one of my year ahead readings that I've done for clients as the quarterly energy. Because think about it. If we think about, okay, January, February, and March, what is the landscape, what is the energetic landscape of those 3 months and that greater swath of energy? And it's just worked beautiful like that. It works really beautiful with the Way Home Tarot and with the Light Seers Tarot and with my Lenormand deck. I've used those 3 and some version of those cards together. I've just used it a lot, and I really kind of focus more on the landscape that you're stepping into, and it has become a fast favorite of mine, and I wasn't expecting it to be so. So no question, Denise Linn, Sacred Destiny. Yeah. Angel and Hands. I have used this deck so much. This one I used a lot in conjunction with my decks that are sort of my animistic style decks. Again, color palette, folks. You can see my color palette pretty easily here. I just think this deck is brilliant. I would never have gotten it. I always have to give credit to Queen Osset because I don't work with angel energy really. It's not that I don't think that there is angelic energy. I might call it something different, but I mean, I think it's very old and it's very powerful and it's very elemental, and but it's not something I lean to in a deck. This deck is beautiful, but I saw her walk through and I thought, oh, I've got to try that, and I love this deck. There's cards in here you don't always see. There's lots of masculine and feminine. It feels balanced in that way. It feels balanced in the cultures, in my opinion, are respectfully done and in balance. Again, there's some cards, I don't know if I'll stumble on. I love the Lenormand-esque type cards that are in there. Again, different cultures, sets of masculine, feminine. Some cards that, I mean, that's just beautiful. Some cards that you don't see all the time, even like that Knight that we saw. I'm trying to think, I love this Father Sky. You even have the Great Teacher. I love this Oracle card. I love this Protection Guardian. It's just a stunning deck. I'm trying to find this Animal Guardian is gorgeous. The Elder energy is gorgeous. Love the Guardian Angel is just a feather. Love the Seer. It's just the Traveler. Love that card. The Trader. That's not a card you get in decks. I love this Mirror Guardian. She's one of my favorites. The Lord and the Lady are there. The Wise One. Probably my least favorite image, but we've made peace with each other. Kind of what I think of when I think of an angel deck in sort of the modern sense. But, I love the deck. The Hunter is there. The Shaolin Master, like you don't get that in a lot of decks. Love this Medicine Mother. We have spent a lot of time together. I love the Warrior, this sort of Maori warrior feel. And I love the backs. It was definitely not a deck I expected to love so much, but I think it's a fantastic Oracle deck and well used in 2019. Lastly is Spirit of the Animals Oracle by Jody Bergsma. I again have to give a honorable mention to Colette Baron Reid's Spirit of the Animals. What I love about this is the color palette and that there are 68 cards. I want more than this, but I love, so these two are the ones I most use in terms of animals. The only thing that I don't really love about this deck, and I've said it before, I'm not a huge fan, let me give like a example like this. I'm not a huge fan of the little crowns or little headpieces on the animals. I understand the purpose is that we're not talking about the animal. So for example, if I go up to a wasp, it's probably going to come and sting me if I do something ridiculous. Whereas we're talking about the wasp spirit, right? When we're talking about a bear, if I go up to a bear, I'm probably going to get hurt if I run up to a bear and say, "Oh, mighty bear spirit." We're talking about the spirit of the energy of the animal. So I think that that's the purpose of that. But this deck, because there are some cards that don't have it, and stripping that away, it would have been a nearly perfect deck for me. But I love that there are 68 cards, and the color palette is 1000% me. So I have to give that deck an honorable mention because I have used it a lot. But my favorite animal deck has definitely been Spirit of the Animals by Jody Bergsma. This is what I used for my Wheel of the Year, which is an animal-based one. And these are, I think we're starting with, not dragon, but this was definitely one of mine for the year. I just love Jody Bergsma's art. I'm not a fan of all the text at the bottom, but I'm a big fan of her art. There is just something about the art in this deck that just speaks to me. I just wish there were more of them. But definitely a favorite animal deck in 2019. So that is it. That is all of the Oracle. I know that there are this is not a list of my favorites. So these are my favorites, these are my favorites, these are my favorites. So all of my favorite decks are in these 3 cubicles. This is about what were standout items and decks for 2019. So some of them are all-time favorites. Probably all of them are all-time favorites, but they are also decks that have stood out in 2019 for one reason or another. Hopefully I gave you enough of a reason as to why. I believe all of these except for the 2 that I need to remake the walkthrough of, I have walkthroughs up of them if you want to see them more closely. So I'm going to stop babbling, and I am going to wish you an absolutely wonderful 2020.